I was standing at my kitchen counter, slicing the last of the season's peaches for preserves, when my phone rang. It was my neighbor, Dorothy. Her voice was strange, clipped, breathless. "Margaret," she said, "you need to come to the ravine trail, behind Garrison Park, right now." I dropped the knife. I don't remember driving there. I remember the gravel crunching under my boots. I remember the cold October air cutting through my jacket. And I remember seeing my daughter-in-law, Claire, sitting against the base of a birch tree, her left arm pressed against her ribs, her face the color of old snow. Dorothy had found her on her morning walk with her dog. Claire's phone was smashed. She had been there since the previous evening. I knelt down beside her. She tried to speak and winced instead. I took her hand in both of mine and told her not to move, that the ambulance was coming. She shook her head slowly and pulled my hand closer. "It was his mother," she whispered. "She said my family had no place in theirs. She said my son, she called him a mistake." I felt the ground shift under me. She had someone with her, a man I didn't know. They followed me from the grocery store. I looked at her face. A bruise had bloomed across her left cheekbone. Her lip was split. She was 8 months pregnant. I held her hand and I did not let go until the paramedics arrived. Her name was Claire Bouchard. She was 31 years old. She was a registered nurse at the regional hospital in Barrie, Ontario. She had married my son, Thomas, 3 years earlier at a small ceremony by the water, and I had cried the whole way through, not from sadness, but because I had never seen my son look at anything the way he looked at her. She was warm and careful, and she brought homemade tourtière to every family dinner, and she called me every Sunday whether Thomas remembered to or not. My son's mother-in-law was a woman named Renee Fontaine. She had never approved of Thomas. Not because of anything he had done wrong, he was a good man, a high school teacher, patient and honest and kind, but because of where he came from, because of me. Because I was a black woman from Halifax who had raised my son alone after his father passed, and in Renee Fontaine's understanding of the world, that meant we were lesser. She had never said it plainly. People like her rarely do. But you could hear it in the pauses, in the way she looked past Thomas at family gatherings, in the comments she made about different backgrounds and the complications that come with that. Claire had spent 3 years pretending not to notice. She had kept the peace for the sake of her marriage, for the sake of her husband, and for the sake of the child growing inside her. I had watched it happen, and I had held my tongue because Claire had asked me to. She had said, "Please, Margaret, I can handle her. I just need time." I had given her time. I had given her years. And they had left her in a ravine. At the hospital, the emergency team worked quickly. 2 cracked ribs, a fractured wrist, bruising along her lower back. The baby, a boy, was showing signs of distress, and the obstetrician came in and spoke in that measured, careful voice that medical professionals use when they are frightened but cannot afford to show it. Thomas arrived 20 minutes after I called him. He came through the doors of the emergency ward, and I watched his face change in a way I had never seen before. He was not the kind of man who fell apart easily. He had his father's steadiness, that quality of staying level when things broke around him. But when he saw Claire in that bed, something in him shifted permanently. I could see it. I stepped into the hallway and called my daughter, Simone. Simone was 54. 2 years younger than Thomas, and she had spent the last 18 years as a family law paralegal in Toronto. She knew every form, every procedure, every angle. She was also, when the situation called for it, absolutely without mercy. "I'm already in the car," she said, before I had finished explaining. While I waited for Simone to arrive, I sat in a chair beside Claire's bed and I let myself think about what had happened. Not the emotion of it, I would deal with that later, alone, the way I had always dealt with the hardest things, but the facts, the sequence. Claire had been followed from the grocery store on Dunlop Street. She had been on her way home from a routine errand in the middle of the afternoon. Someone had known her schedule. I thought about the last few months, the strange car that had sat outside their house on 3 different occasions, Claire mentioning offhand that her mother had been asking a lot of questions about the pregnancy. A call Thomas had received from a number he didn't recognize. Hang up, no message. I opened my phone and I sent a text to my brother, Walter. Walter was 67, and he had spent 22 years as an investigator with the Ontario Provincial Police before retiring to a property near Collingwood. He fished, he kept a garden, he read thick history books and drank black coffee and fixed things that broke on the land. And he knew, better than anyone I had ever met, how to find out what people had been doing when they believed no one was watching. I wrote, "Something has happened. I need your eyes." He replied in 4 minutes, "On my way." Simone arrived at the hospital at 9:30 that evening. She came in with a bag over her shoulder and her reading glasses already on, and she kissed Claire's forehead before she said a word to anyone else. Then she took Thomas by the arm and walked him into the hallway, and I watched through the window as she talked, and he listened, and slowly, his shoulders came down from around his ears. She came to find me after. "Walk me through everything," she said. I did. I told her about the car outside their house, the hang-up calls, the comments Renee had made at Claire's baby shower 6 weeks earlier, remarks about Claire's parenting choices, about how children needed stability and clear roots, remarks that everyone in the room had understood but no one had challenged. I told her about the man Claire had described, the one who had been with Renee that evening, someone she didn't recognize, heavy-set, driving a dark pickup. Simone took notes on her phone and did not interrupt. "Has Claire made a formal statement yet?" she asked. "The police came this evening. She gave a statement. She named Renee directly." Simone nodded. "Good. And this isn't the first time she's been threatened?" I hesitated. Claire mentioned about 4 weeks ago, Renee came to the house while Thomas was at work. Claire didn't tell Thomas because she didn't want to worry him. Renee told her that the baby would be better off without our family's influence, that she had a responsibility to raise her child properly. I paused. She told Claire that if she didn't agree to spend less time with my side of the family, there would be consequences. Simone looked up from her phone. "She said that. She used the word consequences. That is what Claire told me. And Claire never reported it." "No." Simone exhaled slowly. "Okay. That changes things. That establishes a pattern, and it establishes prior intent." She put her phone in her pocket. "I'm going to make some calls in the morning. We are going to document every single piece of this, and we are going to do it correctly, because we are only going to get one clear shot." Walter arrived the following morning. He came to the hospital first, drank terrible coffee with me in the family lounge, and listened to everything I told him without once offering his opinion until I was finished. Then he said, "The man in the truck. Did Claire give a description?" "As best she could. She was frightened. She remembers a dark blue or black pickup, newer model, a logo on the back window. She thought it might have been a fishing or hunting outfitter, a maple leaf with something beside it." Walter was quiet for a moment. Renee's ex-husband had a business partner, outfitting company up near Huntsville. They had a falling out, but they still ran in the same circles. He looked at me. "I'll make some calls." Claire was kept in hospital for 3 days. The baby held on. Her wrist was set and her ribs were wrapped, and she slept a great deal, and Thomas sat beside her and held the hand that wasn't bandaged and read to her from the novel on her nightstand. I brought food from home every day because hospital meals in Ontario are technically nutrition and nothing more. On the second day, the police came back to speak with Claire again. This time they had more specific questions, which meant they had found something. After they left, the officer paused at the door and spoke briefly with Thomas, and though I could not hear the words, I saw Thomas nod in a way that told me it was not bad news. That evening, Walter called me. "The truck belongs to a man named Glenn Pritchard," he said. 61 years old, lives outside of Barrie. He has 2 prior charges, 1 assault, 1 mischief, both stayed but both on record. He and Renee's ex-husband have been hunting together for years. And here's what's interesting. Glenn Pritchard deposited $4,000 in cash to his account 8 days before the assault. I sat down at my kitchen table. "And Renee?" I said. Renee withdrew $5,000 from her personal savings account 10 days ago. A week before that, she took out her full RRSP contribution room. That's a separate account, registered retirement savings. She's been moving money. I understood what that meant. She had been preparing. She had not acted in anger or on impulse. She had planned this. She had found a man, She had paid him, and she had arranged for my pregnant daughter-in-law to be assaulted in a ravine in the city where she lived and worked and raised her child. "Walter," I said. "I know," he said. "This isn't just an assault charge." "No," he said. "This is conspiracy to commit. And depending on what happened to that baby, it's potentially more." Simone had said we would get one clear shot. We needed to make sure it landed. The next 2 weeks were the kind of weeks that passed slowly and quickly at the same time. Slowly because every day felt dense with worry, Claire recovering, the baby monitored, Thomas trying to hold himself together while also teaching a full course load because he refused to take more leave than he had to. Quickly because Simone and Walter were moving through information the way they moved through everything. Methodically, without waste. Simone had connected with a criminal lawyer named Patricia Owens, a woman out of Barrie who had spent 15 years as a Crown prosecutor and knew the provincial system from the inside. Patricia reviewed everything Walter had gathered and confirmed what he had suspected. The financial trail, combined with Claire's statement and the prior threat at the house, was enough to support a charge of conspiracy to commit assault causing bodily harm. Because Claire had been pregnant, there was also a basis for aggravated assault. Glenn Pritchard was arrested on a Thursday morning. He gave a statement by Thursday afternoon. He named Renee. I was at Claire's house when Thomas got the call. He came into the kitchen where I was making soup, and he stood in the doorway for a moment, and then he said, "They've arrested her, Mum." I turned off the burner. "She's been charged," he said. "Conspiracy. Aggravated assault. They're processing her now." He stopped. His voice was very controlled, but I could hear what was underneath it. She told Glenn, that Claire was carrying a child that didn't deserve to be born into our family. Those were her words. She said that. He looked at me. "She paid a man to hurt your daughter-in-law because of us. Because of who we are." I crossed the kitchen and I held my son. He was 56 years old, and he was taller than me by nearly a foot, and he pressed his face against the top of my head the way he used to do when he was small, and something had broken his heart. And I held him, and I let him feel it. After a while, he straightened up and poured us both a glass of water, and we sat at the kitchen table, and I told him what I needed to say. "There are people in this world who look at a family like ours and see something that offends them," I said. "I've known that my whole life. Your father knew it. I made a decision a long time ago not to spend my life explaining myself to those people. But that doesn't mean I was going to let what happened to Claire go unanswered. Not for a single day." Thomas looked at his hands. "I should have protected her better. You couldn't have known. I knew what her mother was. Knowing someone is cruel and knowing they'll pay to have your pregnant wife assaulted are two different things," I said. "Don't carry what isn't yours to carry." He was quiet for a moment. "How did you know what to do?" I thought about it. "Your Uncle Walter taught me that when someone wrongs your family, you don't respond with noise, you respond with accuracy. You find out the truth and you use it correctly." I paused. "And your sister reminded me that the law is a tool, and tools work best when you know how to hold them." 3 weeks after Renee was charged, Claire went into labor. It was a Sunday morning, which felt appropriate, and Thomas drove her to Royal Victoria Regional Health Center and called me from the parking lot with so much static on the line I could barely hear him. I got there in 40 minutes. Labor was long and difficult, and Claire was exhausted in a way that went beyond the physical. She had been carrying fear alongside that baby for months, and now both were ready to be released. I sat with her when Thomas needed to step out. I held her hand and talked to her about nothing important, about the peach preserves I had made, about the geese that had come through the park near my house, about the garden I was planning for spring. At 17 minutes past 4 in the afternoon, her son was born. He was small and loud and absolutely perfect. Thomas held him first and then placed him in my arms, and I looked at this new person, this child who had come through so much before he had even opened his eyes, and I felt something settle in me that had been unsettled for months. Claire was watching me from the bed. She was pale and tired and more beautiful than I could say. "We've been talking about names," she said. Her voice was hoarse. "We want to call him George, after your father." I had not cried in weeks. I had held it all carefully, the way you hold something fragile when you cannot afford to drop it, but I cried then. I cried in a way that felt like something releasing, like a window finally opening in a house that had been closed too long. My father's name had been George Elias Matheson. He had come to Nova Scotia from Barbados at 23 years old with $40, a suitcase, and a complete refusal to be diminished by anyone. He had built a life there, a good one, and he had passed something down through our family that I could not name exactly, but that I recognized every time I saw it in my children, in my brother, in the way we moved through hard things. He would have loved Claire. He would have loved this boy. Renee's case moved through the courts over the following months. Glenn Pritchard pleaded guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence and gave full testimony against her. Patricia Owens and the Crown built a case that was patient and methodical and thorough. Renee hired an expensive lawyer out of Toronto. It did not help her as much as she had hoped. She was ultimately convicted of conspiracy to commit assault causing bodily harm. She was sentenced to 22 months, with eligibility for parole review after serving 1/3. The judge, in her sentencing remarks, noted the deliberate and premeditated nature of the offense, the vulnerability of the victim at the time of the assault, and what she called a troubling pattern of targeted behavior motivated by bias. I was in the courtroom for the verdict. I sat beside Simone and Walter and Thomas, and Claire sat on my other side, her son asleep in a carrier against her chest. When the judge read the sentence, I did not feel triumph. I felt something quieter than that, something more like resolution, like a door closing correctly at last. Afterward, in the parking lot of the courthouse, Claire stopped walking and turned to me. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner," she said, "about the things she said, about the threats. I kept thinking if I just stayed quiet it would stop." "I know," I said. "I was wrong to think that. You were trying to protect your family," I said, "the way you knew how at the time. That's nothing to apologize for." I looked at her. "What you did takes courage. Naming her, telling the truth, a lot of people wouldn't have." She nodded and shifted the carrier gently. George made a small sound in his sleep, a sigh, as though he were dreaming of something easy. I walked to my car and sat for a moment before starting the engine. I thought about my father, who had come to this country with $40 and a refusal to be made small. I thought about my son, who had taught teenagers literature and history for 30 years with patience and honesty. I thought about my daughter, who had spent 18 years learning the law so that she could use it when it mattered. I thought about my brother, who had spent a career watching carefully and acting precisely, and who had done it again for us when we needed him. There is a thing that gets passed down in families. Not always money or property or objects. Sometimes it is something harder to name. A way of standing up, a way of not turning away from difficult things. A way of believing that the truth has weight, and that if you carry it carefully and use it correctly, it will hold. I started the car and drove home through the October cold, and the maples along the road were brilliant and burning, and the sky over the bay was the particular blue that only exists for a few weeks in fall, and I thought, George Elias Matheson II is going to grow up in this country, in this family, knowing exactly who he is. And nobody, not one person in this world is ever going to tell him that is not enough.